Adversity is just an inherent part of living. Life isn't easy, it's hard, and we're not always happy. And when we're not happy, we have to adjust the way we see things so that we can move through them. Life's not static, it's really dynamic. And we have to be dynamic. We have to be adaptable in order to survive and especially to thrive.
Hey everyone, this is Cate, and welcome to this week's episode of Rocket Motivation. First, I want to thank the Stokes County Arts Council for its support of Rocket Motivation. Eddie McGee and the crew do a great job of promoting the arts and bringing great musical entertainment to Danbury, North Carolina. Go check them out. This week's guest has not suffered one traumatic event from which she has overcome. Over time, she has had some tough times, unfortunate events, and some just bad luck, or as she puts it, life. She's going to tell her story of living with mental illness in her family, failed marriages, a son who has undergone addiction rehab, financial stress, and her own physical issues. But she keeps a positive attitude and she keeps on smiling.
2, 1.
Shannon McKinney, welcome to Rocket Motivation.
Thank you, Rod. I'm happy to be here.
Okay. So Shannon, why don't you kind of tell us where you are now in your life, kind of where you live, what you do, family, just kind of catch us up.
Okay. So as you stated, my name is Shannon McKinney. I live in North Carolina, where I work as a certified personal trainer. I have a 24-year-old son who recently graduated from college with dual degrees in history and economics, while simultaneously completing his second drug and alcohol rehab program. To say I'm proud of him would be a vast understatement. I am twice divorced, and my constant companion is a 6-year-old English bulldog.
Well, all right. So we are now up to speed, and that's good. All right, Shannon, your story and your history is very important to this, to the podcast for the understanding of the listeners. So why don't we start with, I know you've gone through several issues. Let's start with, you growing up, and I think why don't we start with growing up with your brother, who I believe was bipolar. Why don't you tell us about that, how that affected you?
It was difficult. It was really a tough situation to be in because when he first started to manifest his mental illness, I was in high school and he was away at college. And he came home because he couldn't handle being at school anymore. And things worsened rapidly. His original diagnosis was bipolar disorder. I found out later, which we'll get into later, that it had changed. It was a tough situation to be in because I wanted to help my parents, but I also needed to move on with my own life. And so after high school, I had entered X-ray school at Forsyth Tech, and things worsened rapidly. He had been committed a couple of times, and finally, I came to the realization that if I stayed there, I was going to end up destroying my life in the process. So I moved in with my aunt so that I could detach myself from the situation, which wasn't probably the most emotionally sound thing to do as far as actually working on my issues with what was happening. But it certainly was what I felt like I needed to do at the time.
Right. How did that work out for you?
Oh, it worked out really well. I would return home when he would be committed involuntarily to a facility for a few days. And then when he would return back to the house and things really hadn't changed because the medications were tough to get correct. They had a really hard time finding the right dosages and the right medications for him. So I flip-flop back and forth between my parents' home and my aunt's home. And I stayed with my aunt basically until I graduated from X-ray school and found my own apartment.
Well, let's talk about your son, because you mentioned him. Talk about the struggles, with your son, what he had, and how that affected you, how it affected your son. Just kind of tell us all about that.
My son really started to show behavioral issues early on, which put a strain on my first marriage, which led to that first divorce eventually because there were so many discrepancies in the way we parented. But his behavioral issues really worsened after our divorce as far as delving into the drugs and alcohol. And it got to a point, our hands were tied. We just didn't know what to do. He hit 17 years old, and we realized that if we didn't do something quickly, that he was going to be 18 and it was going to be completely out of our control at that point. So we moved forward with an intervention specialist, and we held an intervention for him. It was his junior year in high school. And that intervention resulted in him leaving with a counselor, getting on a plane, flying to New Haven, Connecticut, where he ended up spending 14 and a half months in drug and alcohol rehab. The program was amazing, though. They were able to really continue his education so he didn't fall too far behind. And I will say that not only did they provide him with a great basis for dealing with life going forward, but I often tell people they saved me as well, because they gave me information that I had not had before. I had always believed that a mom is only as happy as her saddest child. And I thought that's the way you were supposed to show unconditional love. And what they taught me was that basically we could do everything right. We could give him every opportunity. We could spend all the money that we were spending on rehab, and he could walk out of there and go right back to drugs and alcohol. And we still had to be okay. I had to learn that I couldn't control what he was doing. I still had to live my life. I still had to maintain my relationships, and I still had to do fulfilling work. And that's really hard for a mom to accept, but it was certainly very beneficial for me. And going forward, it's probably why I see life the way I do.
Well, and I was going to say, yeah, that's advice it's easy to hear, but hard to apply, I would think.
Certainly. And it took a while. It was not an overnight process.
I mean, so how did all this affect you and your outlook on life?
Well, basically, it taught me that there are things that I can control and things that I can't control. And the things that I can control, I will. And sometimes that means eliminating things from my life if they're causing unbearable stress. The things that I can't control, I have to adjust my perceptions. I have to adapt to the situation, and I have to perceive it in a less detrimental way, reframe it more as a challenge so that I can move through it more productively.
Right. Okay. And let's talk about like your career early on and your education and some of the issues that you had to deal with that affected both of those.
I was a personal trainer before. I owned my own fitness studio. I was really successful at it for a while. I hit a point about 8 years in where I was having excruciating back and hip pain. And I didn't understand why, because I was 45 at the time. I was also starting to have some marital difficulties with my second husband because my son was in rehab at that time, and that was placing a lot of stress on the relationship. So I ended up closing my fitness studio and finding out that I had undiagnosed congenital hip dysplasia, and at 45 years old needed to have both hips replaced.
Okay, and so what happened then?
So that really put a damper on the training aspect. So basically, I just started looking for a job, any job to survive, because that's what I do. I will survive regardless of what's going on in my life. And so while I was searching for work, I was learning how to deal with the hip pain until I could have surgery. Finally, in 2019, I had my first hip replacement done, and I still have the second one to be done, but that's been put on hold because, again, life intervenes sometimes and changes the plan. So basically, I found a job that I loved right after having that hip replacement done and worked in that field for a year and a half. And it was a great field to work in. I was working basically in construction, doing commercial pressure washing, the intention was not for me to be in the field. The intention was for me to be doing all the office work, payroll and scheduling. But then we had some staffing issues, and the next thing I knew, I was behind a pressure washing gun. But I loved it.
So you go from personal trainer to pressure washer on construction sites. Okay. And you loved
Yes.
it. Okay. What was it so much
Yes.
about it that you loved?
Well, honestly, it was very active. My left hip hadn't gotten to the point that the pain was so bad that I couldn't bear it. The right hip was great because it was brand new and made out of metal, and there was nothing that was going to hurt that. So it was an active job, and it was very satisfying. I don't know if you've ever pressure washed anything, but it is very satisfying to watch something go from dirty to clean right in front of your eyes.
So you get instant gratification.
Instant gratification.
Okay.
Until the time came that construction started slowing down. When COVID hit, we had issues with, building being slowed down. And so we lost a lot of work. And basically, I was let go from the company.
Right. And is that part of the reason why you didn't get your other hip replaced?
Yes, because I basically had no health insurance and really couldn't afford what was available. So I was just biding my time until I found something more permanent that would allow me to have health benefits so that I could have that second surgery done. And I'm still waiting for that to happen, and it will happen. It'll just take time, just like everything else.
All right, so let's switch gears and talk about your parents as they got older and then how you've dealt with them and their issues. So go ahead and kind of tell us about that.
Okay, so while I was working for the pressure washing company, I entered grad school because I thought it's my time. My son is doing great. It's time for me to finally focus on myself. So I entered a master's program to become a school counselor at NC State. And I was in that program for about a year. And then my mother developed dementia and my father became ill. And so that kind of threw a kink in things. I finished my last semester of school while going back and forth between my home and theirs. My brother that I spoke about earlier that was mentally ill was a huge help. We actually reconnected and developed a really good relationship while that was happening because we were going through something really tough together, taking care of our parents. So it was hard, especially, I was packing up the dog and taking the dog with me and spending the night with my parents. My brother would stay with them on the nights that I had school so that I could come home and do a Zoom meeting because my parents didn't have internet. So we developed a really good relationship, but it was tough because dementia is a really difficult disease to deal with. It's really hard to deal with a parent who once took care of you and then suddenly the tables turn and you're the one taking care of them.
Right. So what has happened with your parents?
Well, basically, I went through a process of finding an assisted care facility with a memory care unit that I was able to place my mom in. I chose one that actually was run by a close friend so that I felt comfortable knowing that she would be taken care of and loved just like I loved her because my friend loved me and I knew how well she treated her residents. So once I got my mom placed, my dad started thriving again. He was actually hospitalized because he had lost a lot of weight. He was dehydrated. He wasn't doing well at all. And after being hospitalized and put through physical therapy, he is now able to take care of his basic needs. I'm there every 3 days or so to, do some grocery shopping, take care of him that way. I have an older sibling who also helps with that process. But the process of getting my mom placed was about a 9-month process, and it was difficult.
Right. Well, and then you talked about your brother with the mental illness and you reconnecting and how good that was, but that story does not have a very happy ending either. So why don't you tell us about that?
Very few stories, I'm learning, have a very happy ending. So I am so grateful that we reconnected and had that bonding experience, because in March of last year, he passed away. And it was a situation where my father called me one Saturday evening and he said, your brother hasn't been by today, and that's just not like him. And, can you go check on him? And so I drove to his apartment and I wasn't getting an answer at the door. So I called the sheriff's department to come do a welfare check, and they had to kick the door down. And we walked into the apartment and we found him there on the bedroom floor.
How did that affect you when you see that and your brother's no longer with us?
Immediately, I just felt shock. And I'll be honest, the sheriff's department was amazing. The deputy that was there, he actually did his best to shield me from actually having to see anything. My dad's clothes were still in the washing machine. My brother had every intention of going back the next day and taking my dad's laundry back to him. So basically, I walked down the steps of the apartment complex and I just collapsed and just cried. I didn't know what I needed or how to deal with it. And honestly, the first thought in my mind was, how is this going to impact my father? And that was really hard. The EMS showed up. And during their investigation, they're trying to piece together what may have happened. They think it was a probable heart attack. And basically, they came down to talk to me and told me that my brother was schizophrenic. I had thought for 30 years that he had bipolar disorder, which was a large part of why I had so much difficulty dealing with the situation, because I know a lot of people with bipolar disorder who don't struggle the way he had struggled. And finding out that he was schizophrenic was a huge blow and brought a lot of guilt, because I could have been more empathetic. I could have loved him more. I could have tried harder to help him if I had understood the depth of his suffering.
Well, Shannon, everybody has some tough times in life, but, from your story, you've definitely had your share and probably more. So let's kind of step back, based upon, what you've gone through in your life. What's your philosophy on life? Kind of what's it all mean to you?
Well, basically, between everything that happened with my brother, everything that happened with my son, with his drug and alcohol rehab, my philosophy on life is that life and adversity are interchangeable terms, and that we as individuals have to learn to adjust our perception rather than sinking into despair when something occurs that throws us off kilter. Basically, I feel like adversity is just an inherent part of living. Life isn't easy. It's hard, and we're not always happy. And when we're not happy, we have to adjust the way we see things so that we can move through them. Life's not static. It's really dynamic. Yeah. And we have to be dynamic. We have to be adaptable. Right. In order to survive, and especially to thrive.
Right. Well, and I'm not sure that, when I say I'm not sure, I'm positive, we're not meant to be happy all the time. Do you agree with that?
I completely agree with that. And that is the biggest lesson that I've tried to teach my son. I have told him multiple times, and he's finally to a point where he understands it. You have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because there's a lot of discomfort in life.
Right. So what would you say, kind of just in general, what should all of us expect out of life?
Oh, wow. I think the main thing is being open to the positive things that do happen and being grateful for the positive things that do happen. Little things throughout the day, just like the sun shining on March 3rd, 78 degrees in North Carolina. You know, we have to really be receptive to all of the positive things that come into our lives, because there are so many negative things that we're going to have to overcome. And overcoming those things, it's important that we understand that, you know, it's not supposed to be easy.
Have you ever got to the point where you just think, gosh, what next is going to happen?
You know, it's funny because I never really think about what's next. I have no problem sinking into my grief when I need to. I have no problem labeling my emotions and feeling them. If I need to close myself in the house for a day and not see people, then that's what I'll do. Because you can't move forward if you haven't actually worked through the emotions that the negative things in your life are creating.
Right. How do you want your life to go from today forward?
Oh, wow. You know, I'm okay with whatever comes. I've learned that I can be okay with whatever comes. I have a hashtag that I use on Instagram, so many reasons to smile. You know, I just keep looking for those little reasons to smile every day. And then when the hard stuff comes, I deal with it.
Right. You know, based on all that you've been through, Shannon, what have you learned about yourself?
Oh, wow. I've learned I'm really strong. I've learned that I'm also very emotional, and I'm not ashamed of that. I've learned that I am capable of dealing with pretty much anything that gets thrown my way. And I will survive whatever situation. If it means becoming a pressure washer or working in a factory or waiting a table, I'll do it if I have to.
So, what advice would you give to people or the listeners who are going through some tough times? What advice do you give to them to kind of help them get through it?
Take time. Don't rush yourself. Don't always feel like you have to be the strong one. Take time to feel your emotions. Learn to label what you're feeling. A lot of people go through life angry when the truth is they're sad or frustrated or grieving a loss, and it comes out as one emotion. And it's really important, in my opinion, to be able to distinguish between the different emotions so that you can deal with those emotions appropriately.
Yeah. And Shannon, I follow you on social media, and your Instagram, I don't know what they call it, whatever the name is, it starts with Smiley.
Yes.
Why does it start with Smiley?
So my nickname for, I'm going to say, the last 11 years has been Smiley. And it's simply because people in my life have recognized that I'm going to smile through anything. Again, I can grieve, I can be angry, I can feel frustrated when I need to, but it's always going to come back to, I'm going to find a way to be happy, because that's what it's all about.
Right. And as you know, I do follow you on Instagram, and we're friends on Facebook. You put some really good stuff out on Instagram. If listeners want to follow you on Instagram, how can they do it?
So yeah, my handle on Instagram is Smiley Lynn Mac. So Smiley, LYNNMAC.
Okay. And I would encourage everybody listening to this to follow Shannon on Instagram, because she puts some pretty good inspirational stuff out there. Well, Shannon, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast, but I give all my guests the parting shot. So kind of dig deep now, not that you haven't dug deep already, but kind of, send us off, close the show out with something great, not to put any pressure on you.
No pressure at all. Basically, I had book club last night, and we were discussing a book, and the name of the book is Play It As It Lays. And to me, that title says everything. You play the hand that you're given. Sometimes you're going to get a really good one, and it's going to make it really easy to win the game. Other times that hand is going to be worthless or even horrible. And you have to change your perception, reframe the situation so that you can play that hand and learn from it. Because sometimes the most valuable lessons that we learn come from the difficult hands rather than the easy ones.
Right. Couldn't agree more. What a great way to end the show. Shannon, thanks so much for agreeing to come on. Just great stuff. This has been a great show, and I just want to thank you so much.
Well, I thank you so much for having me.
What a great episode with Shannon McKinney. Adversity is not a single event. Life is adversity. She's taken the body blows and she keeps fighting with a smile on her face. We'll be back next week with another great guest. See you then. Thanks for listening to my podcast. It's all about allowing regular people to tell their stories of inspiration and motivation. If you would like to get my book, Get Back Up, it's available at Amazon. Just put in Get Back Up and my name, Rod Cate, and the book will pop up. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe to Rocket Motivation wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please rate and review the shows and spread the word about Rocket Motivation to your friends. So until next time, remember, never give up and always get back up.